The blood-red sun beat down mercilessly as Henrietta James stumbled through the vast Nevada desert, her once fine dress torn and soiled, her lips cracked from thirst. Cast out of Bismarck with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of possessions, she wondered if death would claim her before nightfall. The year was 1876, and in this unforgiving frontier, a woman alone had few allies and many enemies. 30 miles back, the residents of Bismarck slept peacefully, unaware or uncaring of her fate. The accusations had been swift, the judgment harsh, and the sentence brutal. Henrietta had been given a horse, a canteen of water, and directions to the nearest settlement, a 3-day ride through terrain that had claimed the lives of hardier souls than her. The horse had bolted during the night, taking with it her last real chance of survival. "You'll regret this," she had told Mayor Wilson as they forced her onto her mount at the edge of town. "God sees everything. God might see everything, but out here, under the punishing sun, it felt like even He had abandoned her." Henrietta's crime had been a simple one. She had refused the advances of the town's wealthiest citizen, Elias Fairchild, a man whose money had built half of Bismarck and whose influence controlled the other half. When she'd threatened to tell his wife about his persistent harassment, he'd spun a tale of theft and moral corruption, so convincing that the town council had convened in the middle of the night to pass judgment. She tripped over a rock and fell hard, the meager contents of her bundle spilling onto the scorched earth. A small leather-bound journal, a tarnished silver locket, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and a photograph of her parents, all that remained of her former life. Henrietta gathered them with trembling hands, tears cutting clean tracks down her dust-covered cheeks. "I will survive this," she whispered to herself, tucking the photograph back into the journal. "I must." Lucas Tanner spotted the first set of tracks just after dawn. Fresh prints of a shod horse, heading out into the desert from the outskirts of Bismarck. Nothing unusual about that, except for the time. Most travelers waited until the cool of morning to set out, not in the dead of night when the desert was alive with all manner of dangerous creatures. He'd been camping in the hills above Bismarck, reluctant to venture into town until absolutely necessary. Lucas had a reputation in these parts, the kind that made some men reach for their guns and others offer to buy him a drink. At 32, he'd lived longer than most in his profession, a fact he attributed to caution and a policy of minding his own business, but something about those tracks bothered him. They were uneven, as if the rider had been struggling with the mount. And there was something else, a second set of tracks, belonging to a group of riders that had followed the lone traveler for a short distance, before turning back toward town. It had the hallmarks of trouble, and despite his best judgment, Lucas found himself following the lone rider's trail, his curiosity piqued. He'd been on his way to the California goldfields, but a detour of a day or two wouldn't make much difference in the grand scheme of things. By mid-morning, he found where the horse had stopped for a time, pawing nervously at the ground. And then, most telling of all, where it had bolted, the chaotic prints showing its panic as it fled back toward Bismarck. But there were new tracks now. Small, uneven footprints of someone wearing boots too big for their feet. A woman's footprints, he guessed, by the stride length and the lighter impression. "Someone left you out here to die, didn't they?" Lucas murmured, studying the trail. "What did you do to deserve that?" The answer didn't matter, not really. Nobody deserved to be abandoned in the Nevada desert without water or protection. Even outlaws gave their victims a fighting chance. Lucas urged his horse forward, following the increasingly erratic path of the footprints. Whoever she was, and he was certain now it was a woman, she was in trouble. The tracks showed she was staggering, falling frequently, her path no longer a straight line but a desperate zigzag across the baking sand. By noon, he spotted a dark shape in the distance, crumpled on the ground beneath the inadequate shade of a scraggly juniper. Lucas approached cautiously, his hand hovering near his holster. In his experience, desperate people were unpredictable, and he had no desire to catch a bullet for his trouble. "Madam," he called when he was still a good distance away. "You all right there?" Henrietta's head snapped up at the sound of a human voice, her eyes wide with fear and desperate hope. The figure approaching on horseback was little more than a silhouette against the bright sky, but it was unmistakably real, not another of the mirages that had been tormenting her for hours. "Water," she croaked, her voice a dry rasp. "Please." Lucas dismounted, approaching slowly with his canteen extended. "Easy now. Small sips, or you'll make yourself sick." She grabbed for the canteen with trembling hands, but he held it firmly, helping her take measured drinks. Henrietta coughed and spluttered at first, but gradually the blessed moisture revived her enough to speak. "Thank you," she managed, looking up at her rescuer properly for the first time. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. A week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and his clothes bore the dust and wear of the trail. The gun on his hip wasn't for show. It had the worn grip of a tool used regularly. But despite his rough appearance, his touch was gentle as he helped her sit up against the tree trunk. "Lucas Tanner," he introduced himself. "You're a long way from anywhere, madam." "Henrietta James," she replied, summoning what dignity she could in her bedraggled state. "I was encouraged to leave Bismarck." Lucas raised an eyebrow at that. "Encouraged, with no horse and barely any water." "That's not encouragement, Miss James. That's attempted murder." She looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze. "I angered the wrong man. Must have been some disagreement." He offered her more water, which she accepted gratefully. "Care to tell me what happened?" Henrietta hesitated. Experience had taught her that men rarely took a woman's word over that of another man, especially one with money and influence. But she was literally at this stranger's mercy, and the truth was all she had. I was a schoolteacher in Bismarck. Mr. Elias Fairchild took an interest in me that I did not reciprocate. When I threatened to expose his behavior, he accused me of stealing from the school fund and improper relations with a married man. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. The town council believed him. They gave me a horse and told me to ride until I found somewhere new, somewhere far from Bismarck. Lucas studied her face, searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "And the horse spooked during the night. I tried to catch him, but—" She gestured helplessly at her exhausted state. He stood, looking back the way she had come, then scanning the horizon ahead. The decision took only moments. "There's a settlement about 2 days' ride west of here. Not much more than a trading post and a few cabins, but they've got water and basic supplies. If we ride double, we can make it by tomorrow night." Henrietta blinked in surprise. "You're willing to help me?" Lucas shrugged, the gesture casual but his eyes serious. "I make it a policy not to leave people to die in the desert, especially when someone's gone to the trouble of putting them there. Besides," he added with a ghost of a smile, "I was getting tired of my own company." Henrietta studied him, wondering what his true motives might be. Men didn't help women without expecting something in return. That was a lesson Bismarck had taught her well. But she had no choice. Stay here and die, or trust this stranger and possibly live. "Thank you," she said finally. "I have no money to pay you, but when we reach civilization, I'll find a way to repay your kindness." "Let's worry about getting you there first," Lucas replied, helping her to her feet. "Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," Henrietta said, straightening her spine despite her exhaustion. "I've been riding since I could walk." Lucas's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Good to know. Let's get you up then." He helped her mount his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding that stood patiently as she settled into the saddle. Lucas gathered her meager belongings and secured them before swinging up behind her. Henrietta stiffened as his arms came around her to take the reins. It had been a long time since she'd been this close to a man, and never one she'd just met. But his hold was respectful, maintaining just enough distance to be proper while still keeping her secure. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "As much as can be expected," she replied, trying to ignore the warmth of him at her back. "Then let's ride. We'll stop when it gets too hot and make up time in the evening." They set off at a steady pace, the horse's rhythmic movement lulling Henrietta despite her discomfort. The water and the relief of rescue had sapped what remained of her energy, and she found herself drifting into an exhausted sleep, her head nodding forward. "I've got you," Lucas murmured, adjusting his arm to support her more securely. "Rest while you can." As Henrietta slipped into unconsciousness, she realized it was the first time in months that she felt truly safe. Lucas kept the horse at a careful pace, mindful of the extra burden and the heat of the day. The woman in his arms was light too light, as if she hadn't been eating properly even before her ordeal in the desert. Her hair, a rich chestnut color beneath the dust, had come loose from its pins and brushed against his chest with each step of the horse. He tried not to notice the soft curves of her body against his, or the delicate scent that somehow persisted beneath the sweat and dust of her journey. Lucas had spent years avoiding entanglements, particularly with respectable women. His life didn't allow for permanence, and he wasn't the kind of man who took what he couldn't commit to keeping. But there was something about Henrietta James that tugged at him. Maybe it was the dignity with which she bore her situation, or the flash of steel he'd glimpsed behind her exhaustion. She hadn't begged or collapsed into hysterics when he found her, just asked for water and stated her name as if they were meeting at a social gathering rather than in the middle of nowhere with death hovering nearby. As the afternoon wore on, Lucas guided his horse toward a small outcropping of rocks that would provide some shade. Henrietta stirred as he reined in, blinking confusedly. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice clearer now that she'd had water and rest. "About 15 miles from where I found you," Lucas replied, dismounting before helping her down. Her legs buckled as she touched the ground and he caught her around the waist. "Easy there. Your muscles are probably cramping after the walking and riding." Henrietta pulled away as soon as she was steady, maintaining a proper distance despite their circumstances. "Thank you. I'll be fine in a moment." Lucas busied himself setting up a small camp in the shade, spreading a blanket for her to sit on and unpacking some dried meat and hardtack. "It's not much," he apologized as he offered her a portion, "but it'll keep your strength up." "It's more than I had this morning," Henrietta replied, accepting the food gratefully. She ate slowly, mindful of her empty stomach. After a few bites, she looked up at him curiously. "Why were you out here, Mr. Tanner? This isn't exactly a well-traveled route." "Lucas," he corrected. "And I prefer to avoid towns when I can. Too many people asking questions." "What sort of questions?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that was impertinent." Lucas shrugged, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of jerky. "The kind that starts with 'Aren't you the man who?' and usually ends with someone reaching for a gun." At her widened eyes, he added, "I'm not an outlaw if that's what you're wondering. Just someone who's had to use his gun more times than he'd like." "A gunfighter." Henrietta couldn't keep the apprehension from her voice. "Once," Lucas acknowledged. "Now I'm just a man trying to mind his own business and stay alive." He met her gaze directly. "You don't need to be afraid of me, Miss James. I have no intention of harming you." "Henrietta," she offered after a moment. "And I'm not afraid exactly, just cautious. The last man who offered to help me wanted things I wasn't willing to give." Lucas's expression darkened. "This Fairchild fellow," she nodded, looking down at her hands. "He's married with 3 children. His wife is a gentle soul who doesn't deserve his betrayal. When I rejected him, he became insistent, said no one would believe me over him if I complained. And he was right," Lucas concluded. "Yes, the town council, all men who owe their positions to his influence, decided I was a corrupting influence who needed to be removed for the good of the community." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. 26 years of proper behavior meant nothing compared to the word of Elias Fairchild. Lucas studied her thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" Henrietta raised her chin, a spark of determination in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "Find somewhere new. Start again. I'm a good teacher, and there are always schools in need of educated women." "Not many that would hire a woman with no references and a questionable past," Lucas pointed out gently. "Then I'll do something else. I can sew, cook, keep accounts. I'm not afraid of hard work." She looked out at the desert, her expression resolute. "I refuse to let them destroy me." Lucas found himself smiling at her fierce determination. "I believe you won't," he said. "Come on, we should move while the sun's a bit lower. We've got a lot of ground to cover before dark." They packed up quickly and resumed their journey, riding in a companionable silence as the landscape slowly changed around them. The flat desert gave way to rolling scrubland, dotted with more juniper trees and the occasional cluster of cacti. In the distance, purple mountains rose against the sky, their peaks still bearing streaks of winter snow despite the summer heat below. As dusk approached, Lucas began looking for a suitable place to make camp. He found a small arroyo with a trickle of water at its bottom, enough to replenish their canteens and allow the horse to drink. "We'll stop here for the night," he announced, helping Henrietta dismount. This time, she was steadier on her feet, though still obviously exhausted. "There's water, and these rocks will provide some shelter from the wind." Henrietta nodded gratefully, too tired to argue even if she'd wanted to. She watched as Lucas efficiently set up a small camp, laying out bedrolls on opposite sides of a tiny fire. The practiced ease of his movements spoke of years spent living on the trail. "You do this often," she observed as he prepared a simple meal of beans and coffee. Lucas glanced up from the fire. "Often enough. I've been moving around since I was 16. No home. Not in a long time." He stirred the beans, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "What about you? Any family waiting somewhere?" Henrietta shook her head. "My parents died when I was 19. Influenza. I've been on my own since then, teaching in various towns." She pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly feeling the chill of the desert night. "I thought Bismarck might be different. It was growing, prospering. I imagined I might finally put down roots there." Lucas handed her a tin cup of beans. "Some soil isn't worth rooting in," he said quietly. "You're better off finding more fertile ground. Perhaps." She took a small bite, savoring the simple food. "Though at the moment, any ground that isn't trying to kill me would be an improvement." That startled a laugh from Lucas, a warm, rich sound that surprised them both. "Fair point," he conceded. "Eat up. You'll need your strength for tomorrow." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the small fire and the occasional whinny from the horse. As the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Henrietta found herself studying her rescuer more openly. In the firelight, his features were softened, the hard edges of the gunfighter giving way to the man beneath. "May I ask you something?" she ventured. Lucas looked up, wariness flickering in his eyes. You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. Why did you follow my tracks? You could have just passed by, continued on your way. No one would have known. He was quiet for so long that Henrietta thought he might not answer. Finally, he set down his empty cup and looked directly at her. I would have known, he said simply. And I've got enough ghosts haunting me already without adding another. There was a weight of experience behind his words that made Henrietta wonder what sorrows he carried. But she knew better than to pry further. Everyone had their private burdens out here on the frontier. Well, I'm grateful you decided to add me to the living rather than the ghostly, she said softly. Thank you, Lucas, he nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. You should get some sleep. Dawn comes early out here. Henrietta moved to her bedroll, wrapping herself in the blanket he'd provided. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive as she pondered the strange twist of fate that had brought this taciturn gunfighter into her life just when she needed him most. Across the fire, Lucas kept watch, his thoughts similarly occupied with the woman he'd rescued. There was something about Henrietta James that got under his skin, a quiet strength and dignity that called to him. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself to care about anyone's fate but his own. It was safer that way, less complicated. But as he watched her finally drift into sleep, her face peaceful in repose, Lucas acknowledged that complications had already found him, whether he wanted them or not. Morning brought with it a golden light that transformed the desert into a landscape of surprising beauty. Henrietta woke to find Lucas already up, tending to his horse and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack. You're an early riser, she observed, sitting up and attempting to bring some order to her tangled hair. Old habit, he replied, handing her a cup of coffee. Sleep well. Better than I expected. Henrietta accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma before taking a cautious sip. What's the plan for today? We keep riding west. If we make good time, we should reach Miller's Crossing by nightfall. It's not much, but they've got a trading post and a place where you can get a proper meal and bath. The mention of a bath made Henrietta acutely aware of her disheveled state. She'd always prided herself on her neat appearance, even in the frontier towns where she'd taught. Now her dress was torn and filthy, her hair a tangled mess, and she could only imagine how she must look to Lucas. As if reading her thoughts, he added, "Don't worry about how you look. Out here, everyone understands that survival takes precedence over appearances." I'm not worried, Henrietta lied, trying to smooth down her skirt, though I admit a bath sounds heavenly right now. Lucas's mouth quirked in a half-smile. We'll get you there, drink up and we'll get moving. They broke camp efficiently, and soon Henrietta found herself once again seated in front of Lucas on his horse. This time, she was more aware of his presence behind her, the solid strength of his chest against her back, the way his arms created a secure circle around her without being intrusive. The day grew hotter as they rode, the sun beating down mercilessly. Lucas kept them moving at a steady pace, stopping occasionally to rest the horse and drink from their canteens. By mid-afternoon, Henrietta could see the landscape gradually changing, the barren desert giving way to scattered vegetation as they approached more hospitable terrain. "Tell me about this place we're heading to," she said during one of their rest stops, trying to distract herself from the discomfort of the journey. "Miller's Crossing, you called it?" Lucas nodded, squinting into the distance. "Started as a trading post about 10 years ago. Old Jacob Miller set up shop at a natural ford in the creek, and over time a few other buildings sprung up around it. There's a blacksmith, a small saloon, and Ma Benson's boarding house. Is it the kind of place where a woman might find work?" Lucas considered this. Maybe. Ma Benson might need help with the cooking and cleaning. Or Miller's wife, sometimes hires a girl to help in the store. He glanced at her thoughtfully. Though I suspect they've never had someone with your education pass through before. My education doesn't count for much without references, Henrietta reminded him. And I doubt the good people of Miller's Crossing will be any more willing to take my word over a written accusation than the council in Bismarck was. You could write to your previous employers, Lucas suggested. Before Bismarck, surely they would vouch for you. Henrietta sighed. Perhaps, but it would take weeks if not months to get responses, and in the meantime I need to eat and have a roof over my head. We'll figure something out, Lucas said, his tone unexpectedly reassuring. First things first, let's get you safely to Miller's Crossing. As they remounted and continued their journey, Henrietta found herself touched by his use of we. It had been a long time since anyone had allied themselves with her problems, offering partnership instead of charity. Even if it was just a figure of speech, it warmed her in a way the desert sun couldn't. The afternoon wore on, and Henrietta began to see more signs of human habitation: a crude fence here, cattle tracks there, and eventually a rutted wagon road that they followed westward. Not long now, Lucas said as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Another hour, maybe less. True to his word, they crested a small rise just as the sun was setting to find Miller's Crossing spread out below them. It was a modest collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley, with a creek winding through its center. Lamplight glowed in windows, and smoke rose from several chimneys, creating an unexpectedly welcoming sight after their journey through the wilderness. Henrietta felt a surge of relief tinged with anxiety. Civilization meant safety from the elements, but also new challenges. How would she present herself? What story would she tell? And most pressing of all, how would she support herself until she could establish a new life? Second thoughts. Lucas asked quietly, noticing her tension. Not about leaving Bismarck, she replied. Just uncertainty about what comes next. Lucas guided the horse down the slope toward the settlement. One step at a time, he advised. First, a meal and a safe place to sleep. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. They rode into Miller's Crossing just as full darkness fell, the horses' hooves echoing on the hard-packed dirt of the main street. Despite the late hour, there were still people moving about. Men gathered on the porch of the saloon. A woman hanging laundry in the last of the fading light. A boy running an errand with a package clutched in his arms. Several people looked up as they passed, curiosity evident in their expressions at the sight of a man and woman riding double. Henrietta felt acutely conscious of her bedraggled appearance and the conclusions that might be drawn about her relationship with Lucas. The boarding house is there, Lucas said, pointing to a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch. Ma Benson's a good sort, not one to judge too harshly. As they approached, the front door opened and a stout woman in her 50s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She squinted at them in the gathering darkness, then broke into a broad smile. Lucas Tanner, as I live and breathe, didn't expect to see you back in these parts so soon. Her gaze shifted to Henrietta, curiosity rather than condemnation in her expression. And you've brought company. Lucas dismounted before helping Henrietta down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground. Ma Benson, this is Miss Henrietta James, Lucas introduced her formally. She's had some trouble and could use a room for a few nights. And a hot bath, if you can manage it. The older woman's keen eyes took in Henrietta's disheveled state, the torn dress, and the exhaustion written plainly on her face. Instead of the suspicion Henrietta expected, there was only compassion in Ma Benson's expression. Of course we can manage it, poor dear. Come in, come in. Supper's just about ready and there's plenty to go around. She ushered Henrietta toward the door, then glanced back at Lucas. "You staying too?" He hesitated, looking uncertain for the first time since Henrietta had met him. "I should see to my horse first." "Stables around back," Ma Benson said. "Come in when you're done. I'll have Sam bring up hot water for the ladies' bath." Before Henrietta could thank Lucas again or ask if she would see him later, she was guided firmly into the warmth and light of the boarding house. The interior was simple but clean, with a large common room dominated by a stone fireplace and a long dining table set for the evening meal. Savory aromas filled the air, making Henrietta's stomach growl audibly. Ma Benson chuckled. "Sounds like you've missed a few meals, girl. Let's get you settled upstairs and then you can come down for supper." "Thank you," Henrietta said, suddenly overwhelmed by the woman's kindness after the hostility she'd faced in Bismarck. "I don't have much money, but we'll sort all that out later," Ma Benson interrupted, leading her up a narrow staircase. "Any friend of Lucas Tanner's gets the benefit of the doubt in my house. That man saved my Samuel from a mountain lion 3 years back, and I haven't forgotten." She showed Henrietta to a small but tidy room at the back of the house, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. "It's not fancy," the older woman apologized, "but it's clean and private." "It's perfect," Henrietta assured her, setting down her small bundle of belongings. "I can't thank you enough. Sam will bring up the bathwater shortly. I'll see if I can find you something clean to wear while your things are washed." Ma Benson paused at the door. "And Miss James, whatever trouble you're running from, you're safe here for now. Miller's Crossing isn't much, but we look after our own." With that, she left Henrietta alone to absorb the unexpected kindness of strangers after the cruelty of those she'd thought were friends. True to Ma Benson's word, a young man of about 16 appeared with buckets of steaming water, filling a hip bath that had been brought to the room. He worked quietly, avoiding looking directly at Henrietta out of what seemed like shyness rather than disapproval. "You must be Samuel," she said gently as he poured the last bucket. The boy looked up in surprise. "Yes, madam. How did you know?" "Your mother mentioned you. She told me about the mountain lion and Mr. Tanner." Samuel's face lit up. "That was something to see. Mr. Tanner shot it right as it was about to pounce on me. Coolest thing I ever saw." He picked up the empty buckets. "Ma says to take your time with the bath. Supper won't be for another half hour." After he left, Henrietta gratefully shed her filthy clothes and sank into the hot water, feeling the dust and grime of the desert wash away. She used the small cake of soap provided to scrub her skin and hair, reveling in the simple luxury of being clean again. A knock at the door startled her, but it was only Ma Benson, returning with a folded dress and undergarments. "These might be a bit large," she said, setting them on the bed, "but they're clean. They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Sacramento." "You're very kind," Henrietta said, touched by the woman's generosity. "I hope to repay you somehow." Ma Benson waved away her thanks. "Get dressed and come down when you're ready. Lucas is waiting." The borrowed dress was indeed a little large, but Henrietta managed to make it presentable with the help of a belt and some strategic folding. The blue calico was faded but well made, and after she'd combed her damp hair and pinned it up as neatly as possible, she felt almost like herself again. Downstairs, she found the common room now filled with boarders gathered around the table. Lucas sat near the far end, looking slightly uncomfortable amidst the cheerful domestic scene. He'd clearly taken the opportunity to wash up as well. His face was clean-shaven, and his dark hair was damp and neatly combed. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her transformation from bedraggled survivor to a presentable young woman. Henrietta felt a strange flutter in her chest at his scrutiny and quickly attributed it to hunger and exhaustion. "Miss James, come sit," Ma Benson called, patting the empty chair beside her. "Everyone, this is Miss Henrietta James, who will be staying with us for a while." The other boarders a middle-aged couple who ran the general store, a grizzled prospector, and two cowboys who worked at a nearby ranch greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and politeness. Henrietta responded with the social grace that had served her well in her teaching career, deflecting questions about her background with vague mentions of traveling west for a change of scenery. Throughout the meal, she was acutely aware of Lucas watching her from across the table, his expression thoughtful. He spoke little, answering direct questions from the others, but otherwise keeping to himself. Yet, whenever the conversation veered toward potentially uncomfortable territory for Henrietta, he smoothly redirected it with a question about local conditions or news from the East. After the meal, while the others lingered over coffee and pie, Lucas caught Henrietta's eye and tilted his head toward the front porch. She excused herself and followed him outside, where the cool night air was a welcome relief after the warmth of the crowded room. "You look better," he observed, leaning against the porch railing. "Food and a bath can work wonders." "I feel human again," Henrietta agreed, joining him at the railing. The night sky above Miller's Crossing was a tapestry of stars, more than she'd ever seen in the larger towns where she'd lived. "Thank you for bringing me here. Ma Benson is a godsend." "She's good people," Lucas agreed. "She'll look out for you." He hesitated, then added, "I spoke with her about your situation, not the details, just that you needed a fresh start. She mentioned they've been looking for someone to help teach the local children. Nothing formal, just basic reading and arithmetic a few hours a day." Henrietta's heart leaped at the prospect. "Really? She'd consider me without references." "My word counts for something here," Lucas said simply. "And she's a good judge of character. Talk to her tomorrow about it." "I will, thank you." Henrietta studied his profile in the starlight. "What about you? Will you be staying in Miller's Crossing?" Lucas shook his head. "I'll move on tomorrow or the next day. I've business in California that won't wait much longer." "Oh." Henrietta was surprised by the disappointment that washed through her. It was foolish, of course. Lucas Tanner had already done more for her than she had any right to expect. He'd saved her life, brought her to safety, and even secured her a potential position. Expecting anything more would be both unreasonable and inappropriate. "You'll be all right here," Lucas said, misinterpreting her silence. "It's a good community, small but decent." "Yes, it seems so." Henrietta straightened her shoulders, summoning a smile. "And as you said, I'm better off finding more fertile ground to put down roots. Miller's Crossing looks promising in that regard." Lucas nodded, though something like regret flickered across his features. "I should turn in. It's been a long couple of days. Of course, I should rest too." Henrietta held out her hand formally. "Thank you again for everything, Mr. Tanner. I quite literally owe you my life." Lucas took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he held it gently for a moment. "Good night, Miss James. Sleep well." As she watched him walk back inside, Henrietta tried to ignore the confusing mixture of gratitude, disappointment, and something warmer that swirled in her chest. Lucas Tanner was a passing figure in her life, a fortunate encounter in her moment of need, nothing more. She would be foolish to imagine otherwise. Yet as she climbed the stairs to her small room, she couldn't help wondering what it might be like if he decided to stay. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with the promise of another scorching day ahead. Henrietta woke early, accustomed to rising with the sun from her teaching days. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, washed her face in the basin, and headed downstairs, hoping to make herself useful to Ma Benson before breakfast. She found the older woman already at work in the kitchen, kneading dough for biscuits. "Good morning," Henrietta greeted her. "May I help?" Ma Benson looked up with a warm smile. "An early riser, that's a good sign. You can stir the porridge if you like, keep it from sticking to the pot." Henrietta took the wooden spoon offered and set to work, glad to have something productive to do. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness last night. I know my arrival was unexpected." "Lucas mentioned you'd had some trouble," Ma Benson said, skillfully shaping biscuits and placing them on a tray. "Said you were a school teacher back east." "Yes, in Bismarck, Nevada," Henrietta confirmed, deciding that honesty was the best approach. "There was a misunderstanding with an influential citizen that led to my hasty departure." Ma Benson made a sound that was half snort, half laugh. "Men with money thinking they can have whatever or whoever they want. Tale as old as time." She gave Henrietta a shrewd look. "You turned him down, he made trouble." Henrietta nodded, surprised at the woman's perception. "Something like that. Thought so. Well, you won't find that kind of nonsense here. Miller's Crossing is too small for big egos." She slid the biscuits into the oven. "Lucas tells me you might be interested in teaching our young uns." "I would be, yes. I love teaching and I'm good at it." Henrietta hesitated. "But I understand if you need references or credentials. What I need," Ma Benson interrupted, "is someone who can teach 20 children of various ages to read, write, and cipher without going mad in the process. The last fellow who tried lasted 3 months before heading back east, claiming our children were untamed savages." She chuckled at the memory. "To be fair, the Henderson twins did put a snake in his desk drawer." Henrietta laughed despite herself. "I once had a student who brought a live skunk to class as his nature specimen. I managed to evacuate the schoolroom before disaster struck." "You'll do just fine then," Ma Benson declared. "The pay isn't much. The parents contribute what they can, some in goods rather than money. But you'd have room and board here as part of your compensation, and you'd be respected. That's worth something in a place like this." "It's worth a great deal," Henrietta agreed fervently. "When could I start? No time like the present. We've been gathering the children at the meeting hall 3 mornings a week. Today's one of those days. After breakfast, I'll introduce you around town, and you can meet some of the parents." As they continued preparing breakfast, Henrietta felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had a purpose again, a chance to use her skills and build a new life. The nightmare of her expulsion from Bismarck began to recede, replaced by cautious hope for the future. The boarders began filtering into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of fresh coffee and biscuits. Lucas was among the last to appear, his expression guarded as he entered. He nodded to Henrietta, but took a seat at the far end of the table, maintaining a careful distance. Throughout breakfast, Henrietta found her gaze repeatedly drawn to him, studying the way he interacted, or rather, didn't interact with the others. He was polite but reserved, answering questions with minimal words, his eyes often on his plate or the door, as if calculating escape routes. Only when Samuel began enthusiastically recounting the mountain lion story did Lucas show a glimpse of warmth, a half-smile touching his lips as the boy described his marksmanship in increasingly elaborate terms. "It wasn't quite that dramatic," Lucas finally interjected. "The cat was old and hungry, not 10 feet tall with teeth like daggers. Still saved my life," Samuel insisted. "And with a shot that would make Buffalo Bill jealous," the table laughed, and even Lucas's stern expression softened momentarily. After breakfast, Ma Benson made good on her promise to introduce Henrietta around town. Miller's Crossing was indeed small, just a single street with businesses on both sides and scattered houses behind them. The trading post, run by Jacob Miller himself, was the largest building, serving as general store, post office, and community gathering place all in one. Miller was a tall, gaunt man with a drooping mustache and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. A school teacher, eh? That's a blessing for sure. My youngest, Abigail, has been driving her mother crazy asking when she can learn her letters properly. How old is she? Henrietta asked. Just turned 6 last month. Smart as a whip, but no one's had the time to teach her properly. I'd be delighted to have her in my class, Henrietta assured him. As they continued their tour, meeting the blacksmith, the saloon keeper, from a respectable distance, Ma Benson noted primly, and various townspeople, Henrietta was struck by how welcome she felt. No one questioned her sudden appearance or pressed for details about her past. It was as if the very fact that Ma Benson had taken her in was endorsement enough. By mid-morning, they arrived at the meeting hall, a simple one-room building that served as church, courtroom, and now schoolroom. Inside, about 15 children of various ages were already gathered, supervised by a harried-looking young woman who greeted Ma Benson with obvious relief. This is Sarah Miller, Jacob's oldest, Ma Benson introduced them. She's been trying to keep the educational flame alive, but she's got her hands full with the store and her own little ones. Thank the Lord you're here, Sarah said fervently, shaking Henrietta's hand. I love these children dearly, but teaching them all at once is like herding cats during a thunderstorm. Henrietta laughed. I understand completely. Perhaps you could introduce me to my new pupils. The children, ranging from about 6 to 14 years of age, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in a few cases, obvious mischief in their eyes. Henrietta recognized the look she'd faced it in every new school where she'd taught. Good morning, she addressed them, using her teacher's voice firm but warm. I'm Miss James, and I'm going to be your new teacher. I look forward to learning all your names and finding out what you already know. A freckle-faced boy of about 12 raised his hand. Can you do sums in your head? Our last teacher couldn't. Timothy, Sarah admonished, but Henrietta just smiled. I can, indeed. Would you like to test me? The boy thought for a moment. What's 18 times 14? Without hesitation, Henrietta replied. 252. Would you like to check it on your slate? The children murmured, impressed despite themselves. A small girl with braids piped up. Can you tell stories? Miss Sarah tells the best stories. I know many stories, Henrietta assured her. History is full of fascinating tales, and there are wonderful books with adventures from around the world. Do you know about Indians? Another boy asked. My pa says they're all around these parts. I know some things, but I'm sure there's much I could learn from all of you about the people who live in this region, Henrietta responded diplomatically. Perhaps we can learn together. For the next hour, she assessed their knowledge levels, asked questions about what they'd been learning, and began forming a plan for how to structure their lessons. The children, initially wary, gradually warmed to her as they realized she was both knowledgeable and willing to listen to their interests and concerns. By the time they broke for the midday meal, Henrietta had a clear sense of the educational challenges ahead, but also felt a growing excitement about the opportunity. These children were hungry for knowledge, and while they might be rambunctious, they were also bright and engaged. As the children scattered to their homes for lunch, Ma Benson approached with a satisfied expression. You've got away with them. They're already half in love with you. They're wonderful children, Henrietta said sincerely, eager to learn and not afraid to ask questions. That's the best foundation for education. They walked back toward the boarding house, discussing schedules and materials, when Henrietta spotted Lucas outside the livery stable, checking his horse's saddle. A cold feeling settled in her stomach as she realized he was preparing to leave. "Excuse me," she said to Ma Benson. "I should thank Mr. Tanner before he departs." The older woman nodded understandingly. "Take your time. Dinner won't be ready for another hour." Henrietta approached Lucas, suddenly uncertain what to say. He looked up as she neared, his expression unreadable. "You're leaving," she said, stating the obvious. Lucas nodded, tightening a strap on his saddlebag. "Time to move on. I've business waiting in California." "I understand." Henrietta clasped her hands in front of her, striving for composure. "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for saving my life, but for bringing me here. It seems I've found a place where I can start over. The teaching position worked out. Yes, I'll be starting tomorrow officially. The children are delightful." Lucas smiled slightly. "I'm glad." He hesitated, then added, "You'll do well here, Henrietta. It's a good community." She nodded, fighting an unexpected tightness in her throat. It was ridiculous to feel this sense of loss. She barely knew the man, after all. Yet something about Lucas Tanner had touched her deeply, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the glimpses of a decent man behind the gunfighter's facade. "Safe travels, then," she managed. "I hope you find what you're looking for in California." Lucas studied her face for a long moment, as if committing it to memory. Then, with a swift, decisive movement, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small object. "I want you to have this," he said, holding out a well-worn book. "For your school." Henrietta took it, surprised to find a copy of The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. The leather binding was cracked with age and use, but the pages were intact. "It was the first book I ever owned," Lucas explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "My mother taught me to read from it. Thought it might be useful for your older students." Touched beyond words, Henrietta ran her fingers gently over the cover. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then Lucas broke the gaze, turning back to his horse. "I should get moving if I want to make the next settlement by nightfall." "Of course." Henrietta stepped back, clutching the book to her chest. "Goodbye, Lucas." He mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Looking down at her, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both formal and intimate. "Goodbye, Henrietta. Take care of yourself." With that, he turned his horse and rode out of Miller's Crossing, not looking back. Henrietta watched until he disappeared from sight, a solitary figure against the vast landscape, leaving an emptiness she couldn't quite explain. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Henrietta settled into her new life in Miller's Crossing. The school quickly became the center of her existence, with 20 children now attending regularly as word spread about the new teacher. She established a routine of morning lessons for the younger children, afternoon sessions for the older ones, and special tutoring for those who needed extra help. The residents of Miller's Crossing embraced her with a warmth that still surprised her after the coldness of Bismarck. Parents brought gifts of fresh eggs, homemade preserves, or hand-knitted scarves as tokens of appreciation. Jacob Miller allowed her to select books and supplies from his store on credit, insisting that educating the children was an investment in the town's future. Ma Benson became both employer and friend, her motherly concern a balm to Henrietta's still wounded spirit. They spent evenings by the fire, Henrietta grading simple assignments while Ma Benson mended clothes or worked on her quilting. "You've been good for this place," the older woman remarked one evening, about a month after Henrietta's arrival. "Those children are learning more than just reading and arithmetic. They're learning how to think." "That's the greatest compliment you could give me," Henrietta replied, looking up from a student's laboriously written composition. Education is about awakening curiosity, not just memorizing facts. Ma Benson studied her thoughtfully. You know, you never talk about what happened in Bismarck. Not the details, anyway. Henrietta set down her pencil, considering how much to share. It's not a pleasant story. Few stories worth telling are entirely pleasant, Ma Benson pointed out. And sometimes speaking the truth aloud takes away some of its power to hurt you. So Henrietta told her everything: Elias Fairchild's increasingly aggressive advances, his threats when she rejected him, the false accusations, and the midnight trial that had ended with her exile into the desert. She described the terror of being alone and lost, the horse's disappearance, and her certainty that she would die under the merciless sun, if Lucas hadn't found me when he did. She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. Ma Benson's face had darkened with anger as the story unfolded. That man should be horsewhipped, she declared, and those so-called town councilmen with him. To send a woman alone into the desert, it's nothing short of attempted murder. Yes, Henrietta agreed quietly. I believe that was the intention. A direct murder would have raised questions, but if I simply disappeared in the wilderness? She shrugged. Who would investigate? Just another Eastern woman who couldn't handle frontier life. And now, Ma Benson asked, do you fear they might come looking for you? Henrietta had considered this question many times in the quiet hours of the night. I don't think so. Fairchild got what he wanted me gone and his reputation intact. There would be no reason to pursue me further. The older woman nodded, satisfied. Well, their loss is our gain. And if any of those Bismarck fellows ever do show their faces around here, they'll find Miller's Crossing isn't so easily bullied. Henrietta smiled, warmed by the protective fierceness in Ma Benson's voice. It felt good to belong somewhere again, to be valued for her skills and character rather than judged by a powerful man's whims. Yet despite her growing contentment with her new life, Henrietta couldn't deny that something or someone was missing. In quiet moments, her thoughts often drifted to Lucas Tanner. She wondered where he was, whether he'd reached California safely, if he ever thought of the schoolteacher he'd rescued from certain death. She kept his book on her bedside table, occasionally running her fingers over the worn leather binding before sleep. Sometimes she would open it to read a passage, imagining a young Lucas learning to read these same words, his mother patiently guiding him through the story of survival against impossible odds. It was foolish, she knew, this lingering attachment to a man she'd known for barely 2 days. Lucas was a gunfighter, a drifter by his own admission, a man whose life had no place for permanence. And yet, there had been something in his eyes when he'd given her the book, a glimpse of the man he might have been under different circumstances. Summer gave way to autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and a subtle changing of colors in the landscape around Miller's Crossing. The school thrived, with Henrietta introducing music lessons and a small library built from donated books. She even organized a harvest festival where her students presented recitations and songs for the community, earning thunderous applause from proud parents. On a crisp October morning, Henrietta was at the schoolhouse early, preparing materials for a lesson on geography. The door creaked open and she looked up, expecting to see one of her eager early arrivals. Instead, a tall figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. For a moment, her heart leaped in her chest, but as the person stepped inside, she saw it wasn't Lucas but a stranger, a well-dressed man in a city suit, looking distinctly out of place in the rustic schoolroom. "Miss James?" he inquired, removing his hat. "Henrietta James." Alarm bells rang in Henrietta's mind. No one in Miller's Crossing used her full name. She was simply Miss James to all. "Yes," she acknowledged cautiously. "Who's asking?" My name is Howard Pierce, the man introduced himself. I'm an attorney from Carson City. I've been looking for you for some time. Henrietta's blood ran cold. Had Elias Fairchild pursued legal action against her after all? Was this man here to drag her back to Bismarck to face some trumped-up charges? What business could an attorney from Carson City possibly have with me? She asked, striving to keep her voice steady. Pierce reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. I represent the estate of Elias Fairchild. The name hit Henrietta like a physical blow. Estate? You mean he's dead? Yes, Pierce confirmed. Killed in a confrontation at his home 2 months ago. Shot by an intruder, according to witnesses. Henrietta sank into her chair, struggling to process this information. I'm sorry for his family's loss, she said carefully, but I don't understand what this has to do with me. Pierce placed the envelope on her desk. Before his death, Mr. Fairchild signed a confession and this statement, which he instructed to be delivered to you in the event of his passing. I've been tracking you since I learned of your departure from Bismarck. With trembling fingers, Henrietta opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakably Fairchild's, the bold strokes and flourishes familiar from school board documents she'd seen in Bismarck. To Miss Henrietta James, it began. By the time you read this, I will be beyond earthly judgment. I write to confess that the accusations I made against you were false in every particular. You committed no theft, no impropriety, no offense of any kind. My actions were motivated by wounded pride when you rejected my dishonorable advances. The letter continued, detailing how he had fabricated evidence and pressured the town council to act without proper investigation. It concluded, I have instructed my attorney to clear your name publicly and to provide compensation for the suffering I caused you. It is a poor atonement, but it is all I can offer now. Attached was a bank draft for a sum that made Henrietta's eyes widen more money than she would earn in 10 years of teaching. She looked up at Pierce, bewildered. Why? Why would he do this now? The attorney shifted uncomfortably. I'm not privy to Mr. Fairchild's personal thoughts, but I understand that shortly before his death he received a visitor who persuaded him to set certain matters right. A visitor, Henrietta repeated, a strange suspicion forming in her mind. What kind of visitor? A man, Pierce said carefully. I don't know his name. The housekeeper described him as tall, dark-haired, wearing trail clothes but speaking like an educated man. She said he and Mr. Fairchild spoke privately for some time, and afterward, Fairchild immediately summoned me to draft this statement and confession. Henrietta's heart pounded as she considered the implications. And this man, was he still in Bismarck when Fairchild was killed? Pierce hesitated. The shooting occurred the same night, shortly after the visitor left. The sheriff investigated, but no suspect was ever identified. Some speculated it might have been related to business matters. His expression suggested he had his own theories but wasn't sharing them. I see. Henrietta carefully refolded the letter. And what happens now? The confession has been filed with the court in Carson City, clearing your name officially. The bank draft is yours regardless of what you choose to do next. If you wish to return to Bismarck, I'm authorized to inform you that the school board would welcome you back. They're quite embarrassed by the whole affair now that the truth has come to light. Henrietta looked around the simple schoolroom that had become her domain at the students' work displayed on the walls, the carefully arranged books, the wildflowers one of the children had picked for her desk that morning. Then she thought of Bismarck with its fine buildings and respectable citizens who had cast her out without a second thought. Please convey my thanks to the school board, she said firmly, but I have no desire to return to Bismarck. My home is here now. Pierce nodded, seeming unsurprised. As you wish. The funds will be available at any bank once you've endorsed the draft. If you have any questions or concerns in the future, my card is in the envelope. After the attorney left, Henrietta sat for a long time, staring at the letter and the bank draft. The vindication she had never expected to receive had arrived, along with financial security she hadn't dared dream of. But what occupied her thoughts most was the mysterious visitor who had confronted Fairchild. Could it have been Lucas? The timing fit. He had been heading to California, and Bismarck would have been on his route. But why would he have gone out of his way to confront Fairchild? And if he had, was he also responsible for the man's death? Henrietta shook her head, unwilling to follow that line of thought. Whatever had happened in Bismarck, it had resulted in the truth coming to light and her name being cleared. That was enough. The day passed in a blur as she taught her classes with one part of her mind while the other grappled with the morning's revelations. When school dismissed, she headed straight to Ma Benson's to share the news. The older woman listened with widening eyes as Henrietta recounted the attorney's visit and the contents of Fairchild's confession. When she finished, Ma Benson let out a low whistle. Well, that's a turn of events I didn't see coming, though I can't say I'm sorry to hear that Snake got what was coming to him. Do you think? Henrietta hesitated, then pressed on. Do you think it could have been Lucas who confronted him? Ma Benson considered this, her weathered face thoughtful. It would be like him to right a wrong without taking credit for it. That man has his own moral code, sure enough. She eyed Henrietta shrewdly. You still think about him a lot, don't you? Henrietta flushed. I'm grateful to him. He saved my life. And that's all it is. Gratitude. Unable to meet the older woman's knowing gaze, Henrietta busied herself with putting away her teaching materials. It doesn't matter what it is or isn't. Lucas has his own life, his own path. He made that clear when he left. Ma Benson snorted. For a smart woman, you can be mighty dense sometimes. That man rode off like he had wolves on his heels because staying would have been too tempting. I saw how he looked at you. That's ridiculous, Henrietta protested. He barely knew me. Some things don't need time, Ma Benson said with the certainty of long experience. Sometimes you just know. Before Henrietta could argue further, the door burst open and Samuel rushed in, his eyes wide with excitement. Ma, Miss James. There's a stranger just rode into town and he's asking for you, Miss James. Henrietta's heart skipped a beat. A stranger. Did you see who it was? Tall fellow riding a buckskin horse. Looked trail-worn like he's come a long way. Samuel grinned. It's Mr. Tanner, he's back. Henrietta froze, a mixture of emotions washing over her: joy, anxiety, hope, uncertainty. Ma Benson gave her a gentle push toward the door. Go on, girl. Some questions can only be answered face to face. With her heart pounding, Henrietta stepped onto the porch. Down the street, dismounting in front of the livery stable, was the unmistakable figure of Lucas Tanner. He looked thinner than she remembered, his clothes dusty from the trail, but it was undeniably him. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Lucas started walking toward her. Henrietta descended the steps, her legs carrying her forward almost of their own volition. They met in the middle of the street, a few feet of space between them, both suddenly hesitant now that the moment was here. You came back, she said finally, breaking the silence. Lucas nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. I had business in California. It's concluded now. I see. Henrietta clasped her hands to stop them from trembling. And now I find myself at a crossroads. He took a step closer. I had a lot of time to think on the trail, about choices, paths not taken, regrets. Regrets, Henrietta echoed, barely breathing. One in particular. Lucas's voice was low, intimate. "Riding away from here, from you." Henrietta's heart soared, but caution made her hesitate. "You had your reasons." "I did. They seemed important at the time." He reached out, tentatively touching her hand. "Less so now." "What changed?" Lucas's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I did, I suppose, or maybe I just stopped fighting what I already knew." His expression grew serious. "I received word about what happened in Bismarck. Fairchild's confession, your name being cleared. So it had been him." Henrietta studied his face, searching for confirmation. "Were you there?" "When he signed the confession." Lucas held her gaze steadily. "I visited Mr. Fairchild, yes. We had a conversation about consequences and making amends." "And after you left," she pressed, needing to know. "I rode out of town immediately," he said firmly. "Whatever happened after our conversation was not my doing." Henrietta believed him. Whatever Lucas Tanner was, he wasn't a liar. And in truth, she didn't care who had killed Elias Fairchild. The man had tried to destroy her life. She couldn't summon much sorrow for his end. "The attorney brought me a bank draft," she said instead. "Quite a substantial one. You deserve that and more. It changes things. I could go anywhere, do anything." She watched his expression carefully. "I could buy a small house here in Miller's Crossing. Put down real roots." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, hope, uncertainty. "Is that what you want?" "That depends," Henrietta said softly, "on whether I'd be putting down those roots alone." Lucas took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "When I left here, I told myself it was the right thing to do. You deserved a fresh start, without complications, without a man like me bringing trouble to your door. And now I'm wondering if maybe what you deserve is the right to make that choice yourself." He took her hands in his grip warm and solid. "I can't promise an easy life, Henrietta. I've made enemies, done things I'm not proud of, but I can promise to be honest with you, to respect you, to cherish every day we might have together." Tears pricked at Henrietta's eyes. "Those sound like vows, Mr. Tanner." "They could be," he said simply, "if you wanted them to be." Henrietta looked up at this complex, honorable man who had saved her in more ways than one. The gunfighter with a poet's soul, the drifter who had traveled hundreds of miles to right a wrong done to her. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like very much to hear those vows properly, in a church with witnesses." Lucas's face transformed with a smile more radiant than any she'd seen from him before. "Is that a yes, Miss James?" Instead of answering with words, Henrietta rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. After a startled moment, Lucas responded, his arms encircling her waist as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, the sound of applause and cheers reminded them they were standing in the middle of Miller's Crossing's Main Street. Townspeople had gathered on porches and in doorways, watching the reunion with undisguised interest and approval. "Looks like we have witnesses already," Lucas murmured, his eyes never leaving hers despite their audience. Henrietta laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "So we do." Finally, Ma Benson's voice carried clearly from her porch. "Now bring that man inside for a proper meal, Henrietta. Lord knows he looks like he needs one." Hand in hand, they walked toward the boarding house, where a new chapter of their lives was about to begin. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the Miller's Crossing meeting hall, transformed for the occasion with wildflowers and ribbons by the women of the town. Jacob Miller, who served as unofficial mayor, performed the ceremony, his usual gruff manner softened by the solemnity of the occasion. Henrietta wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Carson City with part of her settlement money. Lucas, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, watched her walk down the makeshift aisle with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Never seen a man look so terrified and happy at the same time, Ma Benson whispered to Sarah Miller as the bride approached. Like he's facing a firing squad he's actually looking forward to. The vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken in Lucas's deep, steady voice and Henrietta's clear, confident one. When Miller pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered townspeople nearly raised the roof. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food contributed by every household, music from a hastily assembled band of local talent, and dancing that grew increasingly exuberant as the night wore on. Through it all, Lucas hardly left Henrietta's side, his hand often finding hers as if to reassure himself she was really there, really his. Only once did they separate, when Samuel pulled Lucas aside for what appeared to be a serious conversation. What was that about? Henrietta asked when he returned to her. Lucas chuckled. The boy wanted to know if being married meant I was hanging up my guns for good, seemed disappointed at the prospect. And what did you tell him? That some things are worth changing for. He tucked a stray curl behind her ear, his touch gentle. But I also said I'd teach him to shoot properly when he's older, so his mother doesn't have to worry about him accidentally shooting his foot off. As the evening wound down, they slipped away to the small house. They'd purchased at the edge of town a cozy two-room cabin with a view of the mountains and enough land for a garden, and perhaps someday, a few livestock. It was modest by some standards, but to Henrietta, it was a palace compared to the boarding house rooms and rented accommodations that had been her homes for years. Lucas paused at the threshold, then swept her into his arms with a fluid strength that made her gasp in surprise. I believe this is traditional, he said with a smile, carrying her across the doorway and into their home. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Henrietta traced the scars on Lucas's chest, each one a chapter in the story of his former life. No regrets? She asked softly. He caught her hand, pressing it over his heart. None. You. Only that it took nearly dying in the desert to find you, she replied, nestling closer to his warmth. Though I suppose in a strange way I should thank Elias Fairchild, Lucas snorted. Let's not go that far. She laughed, then grew serious. What really happened that night in Bismarck, with Fairchild? Lucas was quiet for a long moment. I told you the truth before. I confronted him with what he'd done, convinced him to sign the confession and make restitution. Then I left. And the shooting? I heard about it later in a town further west. From what I gathered, Fairchild had enemies beyond you, business rivals, gambling debts. Could have been any number of people with reason to want him dead. Henrietta studied his face in the moonlight filtering through the window. But not you. Not me, he confirmed. Though I won't pretend I mourned when I heard the news. She nodded, accepting his word. It didn't matter now in any case. The past was the past, and their future lay before them, full of promise. I love you, Lucas Tanner, she whispered, the words new but utterly true. His arms tightened around her. And I love you, Henrietta Tanner, more than I ever thought possible. In the years that followed, Miller's Crossing grew from a small settlement into a proper town, with Henrietta's school at its heart. The one-room schoolhouse expanded to 2 rooms, then 3, as more families settled in the area. Henrietta's reputation as a dedicated and innovative teacher spread throughout the territory, bringing occasional visitors to observe her methods. Lucas, true to his word, hung up his guns, or at least stopped using them professionally. He turned his skills to ranching, starting with a small herd of cattle and gradually building it into a modest but successful operation. The Tanner Ranch, as it became known, provided beef for Miller's Crossing and the surrounding areas, and employment for several young men who might otherwise have drifted into less savory occupations. Their first child, a son named James Lucas Tanner, arrived a year after their marriage, bringing a joy neither had imagined possible. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and another son, Matthew, 2 years after that. Through it all, their love deepened and matured, weathering the inevitable challenges of frontier life, drought years that threatened the ranch, a scarlet fever outbreak that closed the school for weeks, the occasional appearance of someone from Lucas's past looking to settle old scores. Each challenge faced together only strengthened their bond. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas surprised Henrietta with a special gift, a new edition of Robinson Crusoe, beautifully bound in leather with gold lettering on the spine. To replace the old one, he explained as she unwrapped it. Henrietta shook her head, smiling. I'll keep them both. The old one has our beginning in it. This one can be for our children. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch of their now expanded home, looking out at the town that had given them sanctuary and the land that had provided their livelihood. You ever think about it? Henrietta asked, her head resting on Lucas's shoulder. How differently things might have turned out if you hadn't decided to follow those tracks that day. Lucas considered the question, his arm warm around her waist. Sometimes. But then I think it wasn't really chance at all. No, she looked up at him curiously. What was it then? Destiny, maybe, he said, only half joking. Or just the simple truth that some trails are meant to be followed, no matter where they lead. Henrietta smiled, thinking of the desperate young woman she had been, stumbling through the desert with no hope of survival, and the wary gunfighter who had found her against all odds. Well, I'm grateful you followed mine, she said softly. All the way to Miller's Crossing. All the way home, Lucas corrected, kissing her gently as the stars emerged above them, witnesses to a love that had begun in the harshest of circumstances but flourished in the fertile soil of trust, respect, and unwavering devotion. And in the quiet Nevada night, with the town sleeping peacefully around them and their children dreaming under their roof, Henrietta and Lucas Tanner knew with absolute certainty that they had found something far more precious than any gold rush or frontier opportunity. They had found each other, and in doing so, had found everything they would ever need.